Okay, I think we can get started. So, good morning and welcome to all of you to our panel discussion on how to stay ahead of the bribery and corruption curve. Bribery and corruption continues to plague corporates across the world. India is no exception. As we continue to attract funding into our startup economy, bribery and corruption challenges become more real. So, as a startup CEO that's raising money from a VC or a PE, what kind of an organization should you be focused on building? As a general counsel or a head of legal and compliance, what steps should you be taking to eliminate bribery and corruption challenges and stay on the right side of the law? To address these issues, we have assembled a panel of experts that will not only give you guidance, but also a perspective on how to manage expectations, put in place appropriate processes, and get ahead of the bribery and corruption curve. Our first panelist, I'm delighted to introduce Vinayak Mishra. Vinayak is a director legal at Lightspeed India Partners Advisors. Vinayak is a corporate lawyer specializing in private equity and VC transactions. He has spent over a decade with various leading law firms in India, post which he joined Lightspeed to set up the legal team for India and Southeast Asia. At Lightspeed, Vinayak, in addition to overseeing deal execution for investment and exit deals, is also responsible for advising the fund and companies as well as their founders on various legal and risk matters. So Vinayak, welcome and delighted to have you join our panel discussion. Our second panelist is Denise Gardner. With over 12 plus years of experience, Denise is currently the head of legal, secretarial and compliance at Licious. At Licious, Denise looks after setting up the legal department, building the legal and compliance framework for the company, policy drafting and implementation, and handling overall legal requirements of the company. Denise has also worked with renowned companies like Unacademy, MetLife, the Zydus Group, Infibeam.com, and Kitchen Express Overseas Limited in the past. Denise, again, welcome and delighted to have you join our panel discussion today. And last but not the least, our third panelist, Sherbir Panag. Sherbir is partner at Panag and Babu. He holds deep experience in defending multinational companies and conducting internal investigations in matters involving criminal and regulatory proceedings. Sherbir also counsels clients on navigating India in a compliant manner. Sherbir's practice has consistently been rated as market leader for white-collar crime in India and is ranked by Who's Who Legal, Global Investigations Review, Chambers and Partners, and the Legal 500. Through the course of his career, Sherbir has helped multinational companies across sectors address their complex and sensitive issues, and has also led investigations and acted as defense counsel in some of India's most high-profile cases, which have also had an interplay with law enforcement in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Sherbir regularly lectures and writes on the subjects of white-collar crime, compliance, and business ethics. Sherbir, again, delighted to have you on our panel and welcome. So without further ado, I think we should get started with our discussion. So to begin with, we have a series of questions that we'll be posing to our panelists and sort of using that as an opportunity to kick off a discussion as well as get the benefit of their deep expertise. So I don't know, maybe some of you may have read about the arrest of the ED of Power Grid Corporation of India, B.S. Jha, and 5 officials of Tata Projects in connection with alleged bribery to favor the private company. CBI made this arrest and is said to have been monitoring Jha and was tipped off that he was receiving bribes from the executives of Tata Projects and other unnamed companies. They are said to have benefited in various ways: inflated bills, early clearing of invoices, as well as tweaks to the price variation clause linked related to power grid contracts. Clearly, we live in a highly regulated world, and whether it's power grid or other organizations, it's not a situation where you can expect to get away with bribery and corruption. Maybe some do, but quite a few are also getting caught and landing in the net. In a multi-layered economy like India, what advice would you give corporates to help them navigate and stay on the right side of ABAC laws, anti-bribery, anti-corruption laws? I want to kick off this discussion with Vinayak. Uh, as the legal counsel for not only the fund, but in many ways you end up advising all of the companies that you've invested in, right? In that situation, uh, what is the kind of advice that you are giving investee companies who your organization is investing in? How do you help them navigate these challenges?
Thanks, Anthony. Uh, so, in my current role, as you rightly pointed out, I just don't act as the counsel for the fund. Many of our companies, which are not equipped with a dedicated legal function, or at times companies which do have legal functions, at times they would simply reach out to our board members on the boards for their general guidance and advice. What we have been doing is we have been always asking our companies to promote a culture of integrity, wherein people understand that the business has to be conducted in the most ethical manner. There should be continuous trainings of all stakeholders so that they appreciate the importance of not adopting any shortcuts. Uh, we've also been encouraging our companies to think about project planning. So as startups, we are an early stage investor, and now we also invest into growth companies. Uh, as startups, many times you are being pushed from all sides to show results, right? So we as a fund, we have always encouraged our companies to plan for eventualities or things which are coming in advance, so that nothing hits you with an element of surprise, and you have sufficient time to basically provide for uh, any milestones that you want to achieve in the most legal manner. So that's something that we have been telling our companies. One thing that we have realized is that uh, given a lot of new employees join companies, what is very important is that there should be a culture that people are encouraged to think about these things positively, and they're also trained so that they understand the importance of adhering to the laws and being on the right side of the law.
Yes, training and culture, two very important words that have taken away from your introduction, Vinayak. So very helpful. I think clearly there's a lot that needs to be done to create the right culture and around maybe not just bribery and corruption, but other issues as well. So you create the right environment and culture where people, employees know that all of these activities will not be tolerated, even if it leads to short-term gain in for an organization. So fair enough, and we will come back to Vinayak on this issue in a little more detail, because it is something that we will be diving deeper into as we move into this session. Denise, as the head of legal and compliance for a unicorn, and one as high profile as Licious, and you've also worn this hat for similar organizations in the past. What's your advice for to organizations to stay ahead of the bribery and corruption curve? How do you ensure that uh, you know organizations don't fall into the trap of taking shortcuts, paying bribes, and getting the job done? Because as Vinayak said, everybody has targets to meet, and especially startups have very high growth targets. So what's your advice to not just management, but to anybody else who is in a seat similar to yours?
Thank you, Anthony. The first thing that any GC, like you all rightly said, there are targets. Startups are in a position where a lot of people wear multiple hats. So first thing that a legal person or a GC or a legal person at any level who comes in, you need to first understand the lay of your land. You need to understand that what is going right, what is going wrong. So the first approach that I normally do is sit with the team, understand what the gaps are, understand the reason for the gap. Because many a times it is not an intent, but it is more of the person does not know about things. So like Vinayak said, trainings are something which is very critical. But at the same time, the reinforcement of the laws, the reinforcement of something that is critical is very important, because yes, you will have your code of conducts, you will have your trainings, but till the time it is not continuously enforced, at the same time realistic timelines are basically uh, given or rather made aware of. Until that time, it is not possible for a person to make the right decision. So you're a legal person not only educates the company, but at the same time, they also work towards sensitizing the team that, okay, we do understand that there are timelines, but at the same time, build a solid framework. Because if your framework is not very, what you say, legally compliant, people don't know about it, more things are mistakes or rather done because of ignorance and not because of an intent. So my first thing would be understand the gaps, see the reason for the gaps, start filling the gaps. It is going to be a task. It is not going to be like, oh, within few months it will be done. It is an ongoing process. People come, people go. So you need to keep training them. You need to keep reinforcing that. And also making sure that at critical points where there can be a discretionary power given, those people understand that, okay, you need to take your power, but you need to use that discretion, but in a very, what you say, thought through manner. And if you have confusion, please reach out to the concerned departments. That's the whole point of having a code of conduct in place.
Okay, so basically, obviously having the code that speaks to the organization's values and clearly sets it out, but also constantly training and sensitizing the people to the fact that such a code exists. I think one of the discussions that I had with the GC of a large company, what they said was that everybody knows that we have a code, but when they conducted a dipstick survey on what the code really contains, they realized that most people did not know what it had. And surprisingly, even more surprisingly, during the course of an investigation that the GC's office conducted into a very minor fraud that was done by one of the employees, when they spoke to the employee about why that individual did what they did, the employee said that, I didn't even know that this was not permitted by the code. So the GC asked him, did you not read the code of conduct? So the employee's answer was, sir, it's a 50-page document. Who's going to sit and go through it? I took it, I parked it away in some corner of my laptop, and that's where that ends. So clearly, I think there has to be there has to be a better way to make sure that every employee in the company knows that this is the code. These are the key factors or key points, and every employee is expected to adhere to it. Fair enough. So all good points, Denise. Sherbir, you, I think, as an external advisor to startups, corporates, multinationals, how do you approach this? I mean, as opposed to, let's say, Vinayak's role or Denise's role, you have a very different role and perspective as to how you help corporates manage the whole issue of bribery and corruption. So what's your advice to clients that come to you asking for support and assistance?
Thanks, Anthony. I think in some ways my role and profile is significantly easier than what Vinayak and Denise have to do, since mine becomes more of a post-mortem sort of a view. And as they all say, hindsight in hindsight, vision is always 20/20. Let me try and take up limbs of what Vinayak, Denise, and you have said, and try and bring together what I see as an external advisor. So I think the first and foremost theme becomes regular, consistent, and firm communication on corporate governance. Let me share with you my experiences similar to what you just shared about this investigation where somebody said about the code. I think first and foremost, we need to get over the hangover of a code of conduct. A code of conduct, if you pick the Fortune 500, Nifty 50, DAX 40, FTSE 250, everybody's codes of conduct read the same. There's very little, and I think that goes to all the law firms and advisors who help draft these, is that we've put very little innovation into them in the last 25 to 30 years. And in India, we've taken on a practice of the code of conduct gets signed on the day somebody gets their employment agreement, and then after it gets sort of shelved into cold storage. And I think there are, just like any communication, like any marketing strategy, any communication with clients and customers, different target audiences need different modes and mediums of engagement. I think that becomes very, very important. Do we need 50-page codes of conduct? Probably not. Can we make these more crisper? Let's consider doing so. There are very interesting examples we can learn from the industry, which is where organizations, I believe, I may be citing it incorrectly, but I do believe that it was GE, was meeting with having lots of accidents on the factory floor. And then they started the principle that every meeting would start first with having a discussion on safety on the factory floor. And then after you moved forward. Now, when you take the empirical evidence of bribery, corruption, fraud, kickback schemes, so on and so forth, the departments have changed. Procurement, sales, finance, those who are tasked with regulatory engagement, they're the same departments. The enhancement of training, the more nuanced focus, more conversations, more communication needs to happen here, as opposed to organizational time being spent with certain functions that may never have interaction. Back-end IT may never end up having an interaction that has a risk phase. So I think that's the first point, that we need to streamline communication better and approach it on a fact-based, evidence-based approach, as opposed to let's sort of paint the town red. I think number two is to Vinayak's point of laying down principles of integrity and principles of corporate governance. And I think, Anthony, my view as a practitioner is that the controls that will help an organization prevent bribery are the controls that will help prevent fraud or tax evasion as well. The controls are uniform to all three elements. So you are effectively the sell to stakeholders, the sell internally, even to those who may not have, either by virtue of the previous organizations they may have worked with or their own sort of socio-economic, socio-cultural views, may not buy into it, but they may not buy into bribery, but they may buy into fraud, or they may buy into not wanting to evade taxes. And the controls are largely uniform for all three. And therefore, again, partly communication and partly the element that we are not setting up different mechanisms and it's not complex. Controls aren't complex. The simpler the controls, the higher the propensity of them being followed and the ability to check them. So I think that becomes the sort of larger second point that I'd like to raise. And I think the third point, and this is something Denise touched upon, is bringing in a sense of project planning in terms of wherever there is government and regulatory interaction. I think we have two large misnomers that sort of do the rounds around the Indian market. I think first and foremost is the misnomer that there's bribery and corruption everywhere, and if you don't engage in bribery and corruption, you can't do business. I think that's the biggest disservice we do to ourselves as Indians, members of India Inc., and also in terms of our global reputation. As a practitioner, my view is that there are very, very few siloed industries and sectors where the risks are significantly higher. For most companies that are not in those heavily regulated sectors, there is no business in them paying bribes. And most of them, if they are facing bribery and corruption risks, it's not like the risks evaporate. Would it be easy? No. But can it be done? Yes. And I think a lot of that happens due to lack of planning. Something is due on 30th September. You wake up on September and then believe that the organization is going to face significant challenges and backlog and backlash and potentially a shutdown of a facility or revocation of a key license. Well, that's walking into a trap and then trying to find a solution through extra legal means. So I think simplistic project planning across the level of the startup to the size and scale of its development. And to what Denise said, it's not something that happens overnight. It's not a switch. It's not something that you sit in one meeting, sit around a table, huddle, and suddenly you have a list of 10 items. It's a significantly more detailed and nuanced process, but simple nonetheless. You don't need to, it's not millions and millions of investment. It's not taking away the entire bridge round into sort of building up something like this. It's simple mechanisms, listing out when is the next interaction, when is the next return, when is the next NOC, how does it get filed, who has responsibility, do we have capacity in-house or not? And I think these simple steps is what goes a long way. It's better than, and I think from when you sort of look at the arc of sort of cases in India, from no conversations on matters of corporate governance, today we have a lot of conversations on matters of corporate governance. And I think now we've reached that threshold and the Rubicon that we need to move beyond merely having conversations on saying, let's have a culture of integrity. We need to start both at an investor level and an investee level, start tangibly assessing ourselves in terms of what other actions are we doing beyond having the conversation. So I think getting to the point of a conversation was a very important journey in our corporate governance. Moving beyond the conversation to real action items is sort of where the market is right now.
Understood. And I think they're all, I think there's some solid takeaways there, Sherbir, that you've shared in terms of, what corporates should be doing. And I think for me, the one that's consistently, sort of sticking in my mind from what all of you have explained, and I think which you elaborated on a little more, is really project planning. Simple stuff. Make sure whether it's an Excel sheet or you use any other tool, make sure that you have basic stuff like all the approvals that you need, timelines by which they're expected to be done, and then follow through and get them done in that systematic manner. I think one of the key things that organizations need to get out there is really managing expectations of stakeholders, right? Whether it's the board or senior executives, to explain to them that, look, these timelines, for example, are very unrealistic, and there is only one way to get these done, and you wouldn't want to do it that way. So why don't we set more timelines so that the organization can sort of work towards that and get the job done in a timely manner. And I think obviously legal and compliance have a very, very strong role to play in this, whether you have an internal team that's handling this or whether you've gone to external counsel for assistance. Either way, you need to ensure that you have sort of covered the bases and you've managed and set realistic timelines, and you've set expectations within the organization. I think all of those are obviously very, very critical. Okay, so moving on and continuing with the same theme, I wanted to just sort of share with the audience today the Oracle case. I think it's been in the news recently, and so the Oracle has again sort of come into the news for all the wrong reasons. I think they have been they've agreed to pay a fine of $23 million as towards settlement charges for allegedly bribing foreign officials, including those from India, between 2016 and 19. And these charges pertain to creation of a slush funds to bribe foreign government officials in return for business. Interestingly, Oracle had similar charges against it in 2012 for its India business. Those were also similar charges pertaining to creation of slush funds that allowed its subsidiaries to hold nearly 2.2 million in unauthorized side funds. Clearly, Oracle is having a problem managing, managing their business in India, not just in India, but I think these 23 million also pertains to sort of bribery in Turkey and UAE as well. So I don't, the idea is not to make this an Oracle focused discussion, rather, but to use the Oracle example, because it's been in the news lately, to focus a little bit on what kind of checks and balances do boards and CXOs need to put in place to prevent these types of incidents from occurring. I don't know whether these kind of incidents, when they happen, the creation of a slush fund, how much of it really reaches the highest levels of an organization, whether at the subsidiary level or at the at the parent or headquarter level. How much of these really gets is made aware, and if they are not, it clearly means that the processes and systems in place are not working. So again, Vinayak, Oracle is Oracle. They're a massive organization, and they've been around for a long time. But from your perspective as an investor, uh, what are you really telling your investee companies, your boards, and the CXOs that manage the companies that you've invested in? How do you ensure that there are sufficient controls and checks to prevent this from happening? Because a CEO who is hell bent on growing the business can really turn the entire brand and the entire sort of take your entire investment down the gutter if there were not sufficient checks and processes in place. So just to understand a little bit from an investor's perspective, what are the things that you typically guide or tell your investee companies to do and not do?
Sure, Anthony. So I think for investors, and purely speaking from a legal perspective, journey starts much before the investment is made. You, in early stage, you are actually backing the team and not the company. So you place a lot of reliance upon your interviews with the founders, your chats with them, to understand how they perceive various issues. Like a person could be a very good operator, but he or she may not be able to run the company in a more holistic manner. So that's where the journey starts with. So you, of course, back founders who are a package and who can, even if say they will not be expert in everything, and none of us can be expert in everything, but they know when to seek help and when to reach out to people who are experts in a particular field. So journey starts from there. Uh, all good funds would put a lot of focus on corporate governance. More often than not, we are able to be successful in enforcing a particular discipline in the company. And this is again a journey that you go on with the founders and the board. It has to all flow down from top. If when I spoke about a culture of integrity, the culture of integrity has to flow from top. So unless the company's CEO, the founders, the board itself, including the investor directors, they want to have gold standards of corporate governance in a company, it would just be a lip service, and there would not be any conviction to that. So that's something that you would see all good investors trying to push in all companies. It starts from things as basic as having regular board meetings, documenting every meeting. So you would see that many of the companies, they do not have regular board meetings, and that's a problem that the entire industry faces right now. Unless you have a board meeting, unless investors are talking to you, you are talking to investors, you are talking to all shareholders, you may actually miss the goal from which you started, right? So that's something that a lot of focus is going on to maybe have these meetings regularized. Uh, MIS is something that investors push for. When I started my journey in VC investments, much like a long time back, I used to see a lot of push coming from founders saying that if they keep preparing MIS and providing this information to investors, when would they work? But now I see founders also realizing that this discipline is very important because it helps them stay focused. So I see that is happening now. For companies which are little senior stage, you may want that the companies have a focused legal and finance function. So right from say Series A stage company, we encourage our companies to have dedicated legal or finance functions, so that you're not just relying on a HR who may not be fully equipped to run your compliances. From there, apart from MIS, you have the normal audits and the internal audit reports for companies. Now, again, internal audits may not be required or mandated for all companies, but wherever relevant, we see that right from a Series B stage company, you may want to go with a Big Four auditor so that there is a particular level of integrity that is attached to the report. We have seen that at times having vendor DDs in companies is also very helpful to maybe just keep a check on the processes that are happening in these companies. So earlier we used to see a lot of companies pushing back on that, but now in past 2 years, I see companies being more and more open to do their own health checks to basically vet what policies are in place. If there are any such events that are happening, and these are not only documented, companies are doing their own informal internal audit, talking to customers, talking to clients to see how the team are performing. So that's also something that I see Indian startup ecosystem moving towards a level of maturity now as we are growing, and we are maybe still far behind, but as in it's a very nascent ecosystem right now. But maybe you would see more and more of this in next 2 to 3 years.
Thanks, Vinayak. In fact, one of the points that you made about sort of the focus on legal and finance, I think it's traditionally been, especially legal. I think it's been an area where you start investing in legal only when you've reached a certain level of growth or what have you, right? Because it's always seen as I've got to do it, but maybe not spend on it today. And so that's, I think that change is starting to come, and companies, as you rightly said, are definitely investing more in the support functions like legal and finance, because that's where you keep a check on how the organization is doing. Before we move ahead, Vinayak, I just want to ask you: do you specifically, empower your legal and finance teams in investing companies to say, or do you specifically encourage them to say that if they see anything, blow the whistle, come straight to us? If you feel that the chief executives or founders are not going to listen to you, or you've already approached them but they're not doing much about it, do you actually actively encourage whistleblowing by either these functions or by others in the organization?
No, I would say no. Look, we encourage all our companies which have reached a particular size and scale to adopt a whistleblower policy. Whistleblowers are not typically only existing employees. Whistleblowers could be ex-employees. These could be vendors, suppliers for you. So that's something that is very organic. We would not force anyone to, or maybe actively encourage anyone to come forward. But that's the trust that all investors, all operating teams build amongst themselves, and that's the mutual level of respect that if something is happening, they would of course highlight things to you once you have built that trust.
Okay, fair enough. I think I guess the point is that it could actively encouraging this could actually maybe play havoc with the dynamics of the team as well. Fair enough. So okay, Denise, both at Licious and in your sort of prior life as GC and head of legal, what kind of checks and balances are you sort of seeing or recommending to have in place in your organization to ensure that the organization's sort of doesn't stray from the straight and narrow, so to speak?
So the first step, as I said earlier too, is building a knowledge base that people are aware, people know things, and at no point they come and say that, oh, I had no idea about it, which is normally what you come across when you deep dive into things, that I was not aware. So the first thing is awareness. Second thing, when it comes to criticalities or rather high risk areas, the whole concept from top down, like what rightly Vinayak said, that a zero tolerance policy for these kind of things is something which needs to be enforced. The moment from the top it is like, okay, these are the things are zero tolerance and will not be tolerated at any point in time, whatever the situation, it automatically sets the tone in the company. And it also is not just at the top level or the risk level. It is also at the smallest of levels. Like if you are talking about that, oh, I want the company to be compliant, it cannot be that, oh, only the top layer needs to do. No. When you have a manufacturing plant, or for that matter, when you a large resource that you may have, then in that case, your person at the smallest of levels need to be as sensitized about stuff as the top management is. Because it's rightly said that your team is as strong as your weakest link. Now, if not everybody knows, tomorrow, if there's somebody who comes in and due to pressure, somebody goes ahead, oh, I don't know what to do. And then you never know what will happen. So micromanaging is not possible. When your organization is scaling up, you need to make sure that the rules are set. You need to make sure that the knowledge base is set. And along with that, you also need to make sure that at every level, there is an audit happening. There is a check happening. Other thing also I make sure is that build the trust with your team. Build the trust with your stakeholders. One of the key things that I have realized that works and it actually helps is legal should not be considered as somebody who is a blocker, which is normally what happens. Legal should not be considered somebody who will stretch things, but the whole thinking should be changed to, if there is a problem, let's go to legal. They will find a solution for us. I have been to a level successful in getting that thing done. So we do have people who will come that, oh, this happened, how do we handle it? That is the reason why many a times we are able to solve the matter right in the beginning. But that trust, the stakeholder management, you need to do. If you are not doing it, people, and many a times the issue happens that people don't want to go to legal. Or if we go to legal, it will be pointed out and it may be a problem matter, or it may be created into a big issue. The approach for a legal team should be like, yes, there is a problem, let's solve it first, then let's hash things later on. Because if you don't do that, people will not trust you enough or be comfortable to come and discuss things with you. That is something which is very critical. And once you build that kind of a environment, people will anyway come to you if they have a problem. And they will be more comfortable. And that's the way legal will also have a, say in things. And at the same time, there is a risk mitigation happening right in the beginning. So one thing I'm very, is very important for all the companies is the tone coming from top, the zero tolerance policies that needs to be put in place, and legal being more of a support to solve matters, or rather the company's problem solver kind of approach, so that we know the law, we know what are the things that can be done, and legal being more solution oriented rather than pointing laws. So that also helps a lot, and it has helped in the past.
And in fact, Denise, everything you say, everything you just said totally resonates with me, because I have been in the, I've worked as in-house counsel, I've worked as external counsel, and I know that the traditional thinking in most corporates is legal only blocks deals, or legal is a place where deals go to die, or transactions never get done if it goes to legal, etc. So that thinking has to move from legal being sort of a stumbling block to legal being an enabler of business and a solution provider as well. And I know that at some level there are legal also needs to, the legal departments of some companies do tend to take things a little slow. And what I've seen over the years is how legal is, the legal department and lawyers have become a lot more proactive and a lot more kind of embedded with the business. The traditional way of looking at it was legal is just seen as, somebody who you go to only when you're in trouble. But from that now, I think legal is very deeply embedded and an integral part of the business as a facilitator or a solutions provider.
And I've been lucky that in a lot of startups that I have worked, founders have proactively been, and rather set the tone that, no, if you're doing something, have you checked with legal?
Correct.
So because of that, it has also helped in making sure that the things that are happening in a proper manner. And tomorrow, if there is an issue, we already know how to solve it.
Yes. Agreed. No, and I think that is the approach that one needs to take if you really need to get ahead of the challenges posed by bribery and corruption. Terrific. Sherbir, again, as external counsel, and I know you are often advising chief executives as well as boards of large organizations that come to you saying, listen, how do we either put in place systems or processes that can protect the organization, or we are now in this mess. How do we get out of it, right? So, more from the perspective of structuring a setup that is actually sustainable, that actually protects the organization, the brand, investors, everybody associated with it. Uh, what are the common themes that come up, and how do you, in your advice, I'm sure there's a recurring theme that keeps coming up when you are advising boards and CXOs. Could you share some of those with us?
Thanks, Anthony. So I think three broad themes emerge. I think as a precursor and a preface to my first theme is what I'm going to say is that boards, investors that sort of lay out establishment of, or feel that they can, once policy frameworks have been put into place, they can sort of take it easy. I think the first cardinal sin that gets made. And that's, as we previously discussed, policy packs on what are bare minimum policies are baseline. They can be taken off the internet. The investment and time, energy on them needs to be, of course, they need to be, homologated with the organization, but at the same point of time, there should not be an undue focus on that, and there shouldn't be a focus on that merely the policy will serve as the defense to the brand, to the reputation, and otherwise. So I think the first aspect that I would say is budgetary allocation. There need to be sufficient budgets for legal, for internal audit, both in terms of having an internal audit function or hiring an external auditor, or having a resource embedded within the finance department to help check. Because ultimately, with companies, with the manner and mode of modern day transactions, everything ultimately, the finance function becomes the most critical function. So I really liked what Vinayak said in terms of that, there's at certain points of time it's a journey that starts with you're first backing the team and then the company. And I think along that journey, at some point of time, there is a very sharp fork in the road between making integrity and governance personality driven as opposed to process driven. And I think that's my second point after budget, is that the budget has to, in terms of the ability to check. And then number two, my second point being, it needs to become process driven. Just like investors are looking into investee companies and the startups, unicorns are looking at standardization of their product, standardization of their customer experience, standardization of governance processes with auditable frameworks, substance over form is sort of becomes the second large point. And I think the third point is what Denise touched upon very rightly so, is not to see functions that are your first line of defense and are your first line of and your first check and balance to corporate governance, such as the legal department or finance and audit or compliance for organizations who set up, to not have that antagonistic relationship with them. And I think the way out is that on the complex item, right from inception, something that I'm a big supporter of is to have multidisciplinary teams to enable. You can't have multidisciplinary teams for the smallest of items, but on the higher risk items, let the multidisciplinary teams come in. And I think those conversations will help both sides smoothen out the process, both the business to understand the realities, the risks that emanate, and are able to rely on the advice of, someone with Denise's experience. And at the same point of time, for Denise, in the event that there are changes in the business, changes in the business model, changes in the technology spectrum for her and her team to also get to see where business is coming from. Now, it's not like companies don't operate, and I'm sure Denise is operating exactly in that way, and I'm using her more as an example based on her commentary. But I think, again, to make this a process as opposed to making this anecdotal, ad hoc, and responsive to a crisis, but making this part of the process goes a long way in A, creating accountability, B, having better conversations in the organization, and 3, creating a larger ownership around the risk. Because especially in India, without going into specifics, in an FCPA matter, if the company gets fined in India with our current enforcement climate, the buck goes straight to C-suite and the buck goes straight to the board. And the defense that there were subordinates who acted rogue and acted contrary to corporate instruction doesn't really pan out. And I think this conversation will give even C-suite more confidence, as opposed to being removed from the process, having some insight into the process, understanding what it is, being able to communicate the tone from the top from time to time, and creates a formal framework to raise grievances, as opposed to trying to have ad hoc meetings, etc., etc. And tying all these 3 elements together of budget, process, multidisciplinary teams is a fair degree of project planning to avoid this. Ultimately, a company or a startup has a full-time business. This is noise. Given our geopolitical realities and our social cultures, socio-economic realities of the business environment that we operate in. And it's important, but at the same point of time, there is a product, and the project planning can enable the focus to remain on the product and these important conversations to happen in a structured manner, so that these conversations are not happening along a product launch, or even if there is a product launch and these conversations have to happen, they have been timed and planned in advance. So I think those are the sort of limited points that I would raise, in addition to what I think Vinayak and Denise have already very articulately put forth.
I agree, Sherbir. I think these are really the key points that any organization that wants to ensure that it's building the organization in a sustainable and scalable fashion with the right value systems in place needs to follow. One question I have, for all the panelists, and it's coming out of, I think, a common thread that's evolving, which is really also which Sherbir has elaborated on, but really I can see that there's a common thread that process, it needs to be part of the process. It needs to be inbuilt into the system, and the element of an individual or individuality needs to be taken out of it, so that no matter who's at the top, the organization continues to follow the process that it has. One question I have for all of you, and I don't know if there is an answer to this, but given the world we live in with so much of technology that's now virtually in every part of our lives, is there some kind of a tool or some kind of a software, AI based, something that can actually maybe bring up red flags if something is going on in an organization? Maybe let's say some funds. So to take the process discussion forward and to take the human element out of it, is there some kind of tool that can be used or is being used? I'm not aware, so I thought I'd put it out to all of you to see if there is something that that can actually bring highlight red flags.
So I think if you're talking about compliance tools, Anthony, that there are ample and more of compliance tools which can highlight when particular timeline is approaching. Right. I am personally not aware of any tool which would otherwise bring out any instances of wrongdoings in a company which may otherwise be hidden.
Okay, understood.
To
Denise?
be honest, I would say it's not. Even if there are tools, sometimes it is more of a human judgment. Like it is more on individuals, because if something is going wrong or may go wrong, in an organization, the human factor is very high. It's not like legally, though company is an individual or rather a legal person, but at the end of the day, the company that is being run, that is being, every department has their own way of functioning. So today, to a certain extent, you cannot expect that a system will come in. The only systems that I know of are more from the standpoint of how happy your employee is or how not happy they are. Yes, there are tools and there are a lot of innovative tools to see that. But when I see from the standpoint of a risk or a red flag, I haven't come across any tool that will say that, oh, there is a possibility something can go wrong there or something is not happening correctly. For that, you need to train your teams. You need to have, your team will become your eyes and ears. And that is one thing that I try to ensure, that when you have a system in which your team is strong, and at the same time, when you have a really good relation with your stakeholders and they trust you, they will come and tell you. They will come and say that, oh, I think something is not right. Can you just look into it? That is the confidence that you build in the people, and that's how it will happen. But currently tools, I don't think so.
That's what I thought as well, but I thought I'd ask all of you. Sherveer, any thoughts?
Nothing really, Anthony. I've sort of been through this rodeo for a bunch of clients. Some have attempted to make tools for themselves. And I don't think we've received the kind of success that one is hopeful for in this regard. And I think that's also because of unique business spectrums and the focus of where organizations have to, where their risks lie. But I will say two things. I think existing tools can significantly help us, and the idea is to leverage existing softwares better. So organizations that are using, for example, SAP and Oracle, well, Oracle's maybe having its own challenges, but at a software level, at an ERP level, it's a different ballgame. There are significant tools in terms of the ability to search, filter data, place sort of payment blocks, place approval matrices, so on and so forth, craft in a bunch of transactions that require additional sets of eyes, moving beyond 4 eyes to saying, 8 eyes, 10 eyes, so on and so forth. There is a mechanism to leverage existing systems that the company uses. And I honestly think, especially in the startup space, and also unless you're sort of reaching behemoth levels in India, it's far better to be using existing tools, existing technology better, as opposed to trying to, create technology around this, which will nonetheless remain very person driven and take up a lot of management time as well.
Fair enough. And I think what all of you have said is clearly the current situation and for the foreseeable future as well. Invest in the sort of human workforce and make sure that they are also empowered to raise red flags or issues as and when they see it. And of course, I think Sherveer, as you said, there are tools that currently exist, and maybe the answer also is to sort of use them more effectively. Although I also realized, as you were talking about 4 eyes and 8 eyes, I realized that there is going to be a pushback by businesses saying that all of this is going to slow down our ability to take quick decisions. And so somewhere along the way, I think there has to be a balance between, the process itself turning out to be some sort of a punishment where, it's taking too long and versus ensuring that, the process is quick while being able to resolve issues or highlight issues as and when they come up. I think that challenge will have to be handled individually by organizations to make sure that they're able to deal with situations while at the same time, not tipping over to sort of, the side where bribery and corruption starts to thrive. Okay, fair enough. Okay, all right. So we can move on to our last segment and then move into a Q&A, which I'm sure you'll have some interesting questions to answer. So, and our last segment is really focused on the recurring theme that we've had throughout, which is really the startup culture in India. We're the world's third largest startup ecosystem. We had 20 unicorns, new unicorns created in 22 itself to date, and probably a few more. However, startups do face challenges on various fronts, and these are aggravated by bureaucratic trappings. As a result, startups may knowingly or unknowingly resort to malpractices in the absence of knowledge on how to deal with these issues. So clearly, what are sort of the challenges that the startups are facing, and what is your advice really for startups? Just plain and simple startups. We have covered a lot of these previously, but what are the startups on dealing with bribery and corruption, especially in dealing with government officials and bodies, right? So are we looking at a more holistic approach? We have spoken about culture, but when you're talking about culture of an organization, can you just focus on the culture from a bribery and corruption perspective, or are you talking about creating a culture which is, let's say, more diverse, more inclusive, a culture where there is a lot more respect for colleagues at the workplace, a culture where you're constantly training your people, not just on bribery and corruption, but maybe on different aspects of what makes an organization tick. We discussed code of conduct, for example. Maybe listed companies need to focus also on insider trading regulations and on everything else that a company needs to focus on from a regulatory compliance perspective. I don't know, data privacy, for example. These are some of the thoughts that you're putting out there. When you're talking about a holistic approach, does it make sense to actually say that, look, I want to build a company where it's not just about bribery and corruption, but also about creating the right workplace environment where my employees and everybody that work in this organization realize that we have zero tolerance for any kind of malpractice, any kind of fraudulent behavior, not just bribery and corruption with respect to government officials or even internal bribery, right? Because you also want to ensure that organizations are focused on ensuring that those in procurement are not taking maybe bribes, not maybe necessarily in a direct form, but indirectly as well through gifts and other things like that. So I want to throw this out there for all of you. Do we need to now, has the time come for startups, C-suite companies, and even multinationals to take a more holistic perspective to creating the right culture? And should this then be not just sitting with HR or learning and development, but also a smaller group of, let's say, legal, compliance, HR, the CEO creates a crack team that says, listen, tell me how to build the right culture, and don't just tell me about the legal and compliance stuff. Tell me about how I can create, through an integrated approach, the right culture in an organization. And I want to kick off this discussion in reverse, starting with you, Sharbir, because as external counsel, you have seen organizations in different situations. What do you think of maybe taking a more integrated approach to addressing this, not just from a bribery and corruption perspective, but an integrated, holistic approach that says, let's build the right culture. Let's build the right culture in our organization.
Anthony, I'm a major proponent of that line of thought, because my view is that culture, controls, so on and so forth, are uniform. Controls are only as good as the organizational culture is. You can have all the controls in the world, but if people want to bypass them, that's where culture comes in. And the onus of culture has to have two very important components. I think first and foremost, it needs to there needs to be a tone from the top. And the second component of it is that it needs to thereafter become collaborative, insofar as that there is an audience and a buy-in to what gets agreed to be the common culture of that organization. And it can't, it's sort of a cart before the horse, tail wagging the dog sort of a scenario, that it cannot start from a individual function. In an ideal world, yes, if we were to believe what several organizations put out in terms of their culture, that even anybody can bring ideas up and those ideas manifest and that culture would manifest. I don't think it's, the empirical evidence of how organizational behavior has moved over the last 50 odd years is very straightforward, that it needs to start from it needs to be clearly identified at the top and thereafter move. And I think this is where what Vinayak said, when you start you're first backing the team and then you backing the company, because the team is what becomes the company, and thereafter has to create space for more. And yes, this conversation about it, the ownership needs to go to all senior leaders, all function heads within the organization. You can't leave legal out of it. You can't leave compliance out of it. You can't leave HR out. You can't leave finance, sales, procurement, whatever. You can't have silos building culture, because then silos will have that culture within that function, but they will not be able to have it on a more cross-functional basis. So the culture component of it needs to be a far more collaborative exercise than even just merely an imposed exercise. So I think tone from the top has to very quickly graduate to becoming collaborative. Otherwise, it just stays tone from the top and doesn't get followed by the rank and file. And I think we have several organizations in India that have demonstrated, a very, very strong culture of ethics, created a brand of ethics and corporate governance that we need not, and it's not something that there's no global import to it. This is something that we can lead the world on a governance scale. The Tatas did it. They were one of the first organizations in the world to have an 8-hour working day for factory workers, when even Europe and North America at that point of time, with all the labor movements, were unable to do. And that's, so we've had organizations like Forbes Marshall, you've had steps taken by groups like Mahindra, so on and so forth, and smaller organizations. There are multiple smaller organizations that have sort of led the way forward. So I think this is something which is size agnostic. It is jurisdiction agnostic. It is ours for the taking as India sort of goes from 20 unicorns to 100 unicorns. And as we sort of enter not just our year, but our decade and probably the next 50 years of economic growth, I do think the identity of corporate India should be of governance champions. And we should, and maybe I'm sort of putting out too much of, I'm being too philosophical here, but I think that would be my hope and desire, that our smaller organizations that are small today and are going to become market leaders and global leaders tomorrow are going to lead this conversation in times to come.
Thanks, Sharbir. And in fact, I love the term governance champions, because I would love to, see over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, a change where, the perception of doing business in India changes, where people today, I think the perception is that you still need to bribe to get your work done. But that perception could change if corporate India itself unites in a way that it makes very clear that there will be no bribes given. And if there are no bribes given, then obviously the opportunities where the bribe askers are also going to stop asking, because they know that more and more companies now have a code and systems in place that do not allow them to pay bribes for literally anything. And that, of course, as a whole, changes the way people and investors look at India as an investment destination. So definitely, here's hoping to many more governance champions in India Inc. Not just one Tata's, but maybe 100 and maybe 1,000 and so on and so forth, where every company takes pride in the fact that they are a governance champion. So, all good points, Sharbir. Vinayak, what are your thoughts in terms of, getting culture and, what Sharbir just said about have more governance champions, and what do you think as, the next few years will look like for India?
Sure, I'll actually pick up from where Sherby left. And I think when we were chatting with Denise yesterday, she also picked up a point that once you have a culture of planning as well, like you are not hit by surprise by any regulatory requirement. If you have to launch a store, you know that this store would be launched in say 3 months, and therefore all the permits, consents required for that store have to be procured. And if you have a timeline of 3 months for procurement of the equipment, whereas the statutory period for grant of a particular license is 2 months, you can plan well in advance, right? And then therefore you're not rushing for a deadline, but you have sufficient time to adhere to the particular timeline. The government authorities who have to consider, inspect, and then grant you a permit, they also have sufficient time to go for it, and therefore there is no need of taking any shortcuts. So that's something that a culture of planning, wherein people are educated about timelines taken for various things, and they are aware and they work on those timelines. That's very important. The other thing that I would like to emphasize is again something that we already touched upon during this call is you should empower your legal finance function, which are the first line of defense, or which are your crusaders when it comes to compliances, to do the right thing, and maybe also advise the board and the CXOs if the legal compliance people are not at CXO position to do the right thing. There's a famous, again, Sherbir said that he was being philosophical. I'll be slightly more philosophical. There's a very famous quote by Tulsidas in Ramcharitmanas, which, if translated into English, that simply says that if Guru, your minister, and the teacher, they speak good things for due to fear or to gain a favor, then the state of dharma, state itself, and health, they are bound to fail, right? So as maybe the ministers, the councils to the companies, it's our obligation to speak the truth at all time, be it whatever cost it may come, right? Because that's what you're being paid for. And even if the other your audience may not like to hear what you're saying, you have to speak the truth. For that, you should be enabled by the organization that you have the liberty to speak the truth. Maybe show the mirror. Maybe be that designated pessimist in the organization to speak the truth without any fear of any backlash. So that's something that I think corporate India should move towards now. I see many companies which have already moved to the direction now, with a lot of heavy hitters joining in-house roles, be it as the CFO or be it as the general counsel in companies, firms. Anyway, now these departments have a larger voice than they already had in past. So I see a good progress in that direction, and hoping that more empowerment would come to these functions in future.
No, that's a very good point, Vinayak. In fact, something that all leaders of organizations need to pay attention to, right? Which is don't have a system where people are scared to speak up, and which is, of course, this is part of the speak up culture that people keep talking about. Sort of ties into the whistleblowing setup that every organization should have, which is really to make sure that there are systems and processes in place that empower people to speak up. Although a whistleblowing policy generally tends to keep the whistleblower's identity anonymous. But if we really focus on building the right culture, then people should be able to speak up, even though, even if where their identity is revealed, there should still not be a fear that there will be retaliation or victimization for speaking up. So creating the right culture in that sense is absolutely spot on. Where people can speak up against their managers, supervisors, or senior leadership without the fear of retaliation, then I think we have reached that stage where you don't need a whistleblowing policy as such. Although I feel that seeing where we are today, it feels a tad utopian, but I'm sure that maybe over the years we will ultimately get to a place where people can speak up. Even the person who's at the lowest rung in the organization should be able to speak up against the CEO or at least alert the CEO to something that is happening without being worried about any retaliation, or maybe even go to the board above the CEO's head and say that this is what is happening and you may want to look into it. So anyway, I feel it's a tad utopian today, but I think with the right investment in training, culture, processes, etc., we could probably get there. Denise, your thoughts, in terms of where we are headed and what I know that you had mentioned training and culture as important elements, whistleblowing as something that you believe strongly in. So what are your thoughts?
So I would rather say a lot of companies, when they come to, oh, we want to build a culture, they list out what the culture should be. My view comes in from the standpoint, list out what the culture shouldn't be, because not everyone is same. How I handle my team is not going to be the same as how a different function handles the team. In your team, you will have multiple people with whom you have to have different approaches. So if we say that, yes, there is a zero tolerance towards misbehavior, there is zero tolerance towards unethical practices, yes, there is zero tolerance towards making a hostile environment or behaving in such a manner where a person is not comfortable, is what I would say, that once you have those bases clear, people will be able to work. People will be able to build that confidence. They know that if I want to go and have a conversation, I can go and have a conversation. The other thing that I think is, and I can't say less about that, is more on the lines of your training and knowledge base. What I have seen in my experience, that people don't know. Like, one of the thing that happened in one of my previous companies, I was doing a compliance audit, and I was like, oh, do you know that if you file these things at this point in time, you'll actually get a rebate? They're like, no, we had no idea about it. We just know that we have to file it on time. But if we filed it in, a little earlier, we didn't know that there was concessions or some, benefits that I would get. So those are the things. And to be very honest, all conversations about building a system, having tools in place, till the time your people don't think, or rather don't become accountable, don't think that is my company and I have to work in a very ethical manner, however many process we put, that doesn't work. And one thing that I really like about Licious is that they basically go and say, you are the magical ingredient in the company. So for us, our people are very important. And that is the reason why people do go out of their way to make sure that the company is doing well. And when you build that when you know that the company is invested in you, you will try everything to make sure that the company does not get into a position where it will be a problem. And then the approach completely changes. So when you say that, oh, these things are to be done, it is more receptive. Oh, we understand, if we do this, then the company will not get into problem. But if the people are not happy, if your person does not, your lowest level of person does not feel accountable or part of the company, that time the thing happens that there the micromanagement comes in there. You have to keep overseeing, and because of it, there would be misses. So I would say, yes, tools are there. There are a lot of things. But at the end of the day, if you have a good team, you are basically spared, your time is spared, your bandwidth is spared to do a lot more other things, which will help the company grow rather than trying to see that whether they are doing their job or not. So for me, at the end of the day, your people knowing what they are supposed to do and know what is right and what is wrong. Once that thing is done, your issues will drastically reduce, and you don't even have to worry, because you know that your people know what is right and what is not right.
Culture and invest in people. I think that's your key takeaway. And I couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, a company in which people feel wanted, loved, empowered, and where they feel that they have they have skin in the game, they have a stake in the company's continued success and growth, you'll find that everybody becomes sort of a foot soldier in the battle against in the battle to protect the company's brand and image, and protect it in the right way, not by sweeping things under the carpet, but by actually bringing it to light. So I agree 100%, with what you just said. Okay, terrific. So this was we're at the fag end of our session, and before we wrap up, I just want to give an opportunity to our participants, if any of them have any questions, either for all participants or all our panelists or some. This is a good time. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll sort of ask our panelists to give their views, thoughts, etc. So it's a good time for Q&A and questions. So if any of you have questions, we can ask. Okay, we're starting to see some questions. Okay, so I have, there's a question here, which is, my company has received 0 complaints in relation to unethical practices. Nonetheless, it is possible that some employees are indulging in it. How do you suggest I review the effectiveness of my compliance program? Anybody wants to take this? Denise?
Yeah. So, see, when you build a compliance program, you will have your reporting mechanism. Not everyone is very confident about it. So, one thing that I would suggest is on a quarterly basis, or maybe in a 6-monthly basis, have an audit. At the same time, have interactions with the team members who are actually handling, or just have some candid conversations, because not everyone is comfortable, one. And second thing, there are going to be issues where people are thinking that if I say I am at a very low position, there is I cannot approach the CEO. It is like a big difference over there. If I say, and if something happens or other a retaliation happens, then they will not even know, and I'm a very small fish. So my suggestion would be that first thing, audits, of course. And second thing, during your trainings, or just show yourself over there, whoever is the person, like when you're doing your audit, when you're doing your training, you have to build that trust. So yes, there may be no reporting, but at the same time, if you do your audits, if you keep connecting with people, people will be more comfortable to come and let you know.
Audits and connecting with people are the best way to ensure that you stay on the right side of the law. All right.
I think
sorry, Sharbir, please go ahead.
Just to add to what Denise said, I think as part of whistleblowers and reports in general must be embraced. We will get, organizations will receive whistleblowing complaints that may be more HR issue specific, as opposed to really covering core elements that go into the compliance program on fraud, bribery, insider trading, or whatever else it is. And that should not be a reason to either communicate a shutdown, but rather to keep embracing it. There's an easy way to separate the wheat from the chaff. So I would agree with Denise that building that trust, being out there, being visible, so that people can come and have conversations, and not really become a pressure cooker moment that, that things get so bad that somebody now has to burst and write letters either to investors or to the board members or wherever else it is, and to be in that position. And then after, to exercise professional judgment when issues do get reported, what can be handled at the level of the compliance officer, what needs to get escalated. I think that's an important part and parcel of this conversation. It's an ongoing process. There's never going to be, I think, anybody who tries to place a metric on compliance, which is more of an ad hoc metric of we've checked 50 things. That's not going to be your, that there's very little to check on that. And that could be, you could have an entirely different result in the next quarter, or an entirely different result in the next year. It's an ongoing conversation, and it needs to be looked at as an ongoing conversation.
Great, Sharbir. I have an interesting question here, and maybe Vinayak, you may want to take a first crack at it. What are your thoughts on setting up an independent supervisory board consisting of external members only, and an internal member as a liaison between the company and the members to control compliance issues of the company. Is this feasible? Wow.
So Anthony, that's something which is a question that has come more than twice in past 1 year, and that's something that companies are thinking about. If there has been any instance in any company, at times they're simply thinking about this third party. This may not be a board, you may call it a committee or whatever, some supervisory body which simply audits things and then reports to the board in black and white. So that's something that we see or hear happening in many companies. And then this body is typically comprised of professional internal auditors, some financial DD folks, some lawyers who would then simply be keeping, it may be a second pair of eyes, simply keeping a check on things and then reporting to board, wherein this would be the expert body to take care of such instances.
All right. Sherbir and Denise, what are your thoughts on this?
I think there needs to be a moment in terms of size for this to happen. I think we are already a very highly regulated country. We have a significant amount of government regulation. There are our boards. I think our boards can be made to work. I think even startups where their size is becoming larger than several companies that are being traded on our stock exchanges or by valuation, the establishment of audit committees, and I think we should try and use existing mechanisms more, more effectively. And the two board concept is not new. The two board concept has been prevalent in Germany all along, where you have a managing board as well as you have a supervisory board. And two boards are not going to solve the problem. If I take you through from Siemens to Daimler to Wirecard to Volkswagen, two boards are not going to solve the problem. I think we need our existing boards to become more effective. We need to create better mechanisms for them. Otherwise, they'll just be functioning in the same way. I think what we do need is audit committees need to have resources to monitor, investigate matters. They need to have professional advisors to help distill the quantum of information that they get. Typically you either have the audit committee or this new concept that we have of pre-audit committee before closing of financials that happens one day earlier. You have this significant volume of data that has to get distilled. Professional advisors dealing with complex parts in the organization are giving 3-minute presentations on items that have taken years to sort of put together. We need to empower our boards with better capacity to distill that information, because it's virtually impossible for any singular group of 3 individuals or 4 individuals to sort of effectively consume such large volumes of data. And our engagement has to be far more with our audit committees or subcommittees of the board who are charged with governance aspects. It shouldn't really just be designated board meetings. There can be more informal arrangements. So I think, to sort of my personal view, I think is, let's not get into supervisory boards and another round of where we'll have form compliance, we won't have substance compliance. Let's strengthen existing boards, existing board committees, and evaluate how we can give them more capacity to act independently, especially when they're dealing with boards in unicorns and startups where multiple investors have nominee directors, and you need to have a group of independent directors who sort of help ensure that balance can be struck between competing interests.
I would agree with what Sherbir is saying to a lot of extent, because one part we forget, that when you talk about having a board, when you talk about having a committee, there are procedures to be followed. There are, if you're talking about audit, if you're talking about supervisory, if you're talking about also going to the extent of seeing that, okay, what is happening, doing an audit, somewhere when you have an internal audit team that is happening, and then when you have an external that is happening, there are two activities that are happening. That is one. Second thing, your business is going to get affected. At the end of the day, if you are a listed company, or if everything is like in order and everything is working clockwork, then it makes more sense that, okay, you have somebody who is basically looking around to make sure that whatever optimization can happen or whatever misses are happening can be done. But at the same time, having additional boards may not suffice the purpose. At the same time, it will actually increase your paperwork more. And nowadays, a lot of founders have a founder's office. Those people are anyway doing a second level of audit. They are anyway doing the second level of checks to see what is happening, to see if there is anything that can be optimized, to even oversee if things are going right, if the work is happening, and they do random checks. So you have your internal team who is already working on it. Then you have your founders team who is already second level of eyes that you have. And then you bringing one more. From the startup standpoint, I don't see much of a benefit. Maybe from a group company standpoint, that, oh, there are so many subsidiaries or joint ventures or other associate companies, there you may have this, that, oh, you need to have a second level of check, because maybe your parent company would be completely compliant, but your subsidiary or an associate company may not be as compliant. And many a times, Vinayak would agree that when the investment comes in, whatever is applicable to your main company has to be passed down to your subsidiary. So when you are doing compliances for your company, your subsidiary has to follow those. And many a times in those things, there can be misses. So there it may be something that can be explored, because then there is one committee that is looking across multiple companies, and then that may be a benefit. But if you're just talking about a startup, and if you're just talking about the current scenario, I would say we are still maybe about 5 to 6 years, or maybe a 10-year gap where we can actually go to that level. But currently, from a startup standpoint, it would be counterproductive.
I firmly believe that maybe given audit committees and all are mandated for public companies or listed companies with a particular threshold, a supervisory board may not, but maybe an expert panel or committee which supervises things and reports into the board, because board is ultimately liable under the Companies Act. It has fiduciary duties to its shareholders and all. And given what Sherby said, there are many startups now which are valued way higher than many of the listed companies in India. So that supervisory committee to take care of compliances is really important, because more often than not, you would see that the board members themselves may not be equipped to understand say finances all the time. Like for a audit committee, statutory requirement is that a particular number of members of the audit committee have to be pros in finance now, and all of those members have to be directors. So having that as in having those capable people on the committees is, in my view, at least in my limited experience, may not be practical all the times, and therefore having the right people to advise or maybe supervise may be a good idea, especially for grown startups.
Just adding to what Vinayak is saying, maybe a specialist advising the board when there is a presentation happening by the that particular department makes more sense, because the expert will know what to ask and what to see. But at the same time, having a completely different board is an exercise. I would rather say it makes more sense to have an expert who will just advise, see the thing, and then submit a report. That's a faster mechanism. At the same time, it will not be something which will consume time, and the person will know what is to be seen.
Fair enough. All good points. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our session, but we have at least 5 or 6 questions, and I realize that we won't have time for all. So I'm just going to pick 2 questions from this and ask of you, the panelists, and request you to we had a stop at 1, but would you all be okay with maybe taking 1 or 2 questions more, and then we can close the call? Is that fine?
I think you can, from my perspective, we can go on for 4 more minutes.
Okay, 4 more minutes. Denise, Sherbir?
I can do 9.
9. Wow, I love the precision we are at here. Denise, how about you?
Yeah, I think till 110 is fine.
Okay, great. So I'm just quickly going to dive into the questions. Maybe all three of you don't need to answer all the questions. Maybe if we get one answer from each of you, we do 3 questions and then we can close the call. So the first one that I have, Oracle's example is rather disturbing from a compliance perspective. Here is a company that continues to thrive in India, but indulges in repeated acts of non-compliance. How does one put this example into perspective and explain to employees that are endangering compliance culture?
So I can give you a view from investor perspective. Being on this side, and it has been a recent move for me. I've only been on this side for 2 years. I see that a non-compliant company or a company which does not take compliance seriously is a red flag for any investor from day one. Your board may not be comfortable with the state of affairs there. The next round of investment may be impacted because of that. And this we see in real time that these become critical gaping issues, especially for foreign investors when they consider your company for investment. So I think that that's something that to be used to educate the employees internally, that this would have real and long-term impact on the company's trajectory.
Agreed. Okay. I'm going to take another question. Thank you, Vinayak. So the other question is, we conduct B2B business with startups, MNCs, etc. across India. What precautionary measures should we adopt to protect our company from legal implications? I'm guessing bribery and corruption being the focus. Denise or Sherbir, any of you can take it. I know if Sherbir answers, this is the kind of stuff that he would charge top dollar for. But we're going to request him to share some of his knowledge from his experience for the benefit of this group.
So I think I'll keep it short, given that we're running out of time and we need to finish one more question. I think first and foremost is a certain degree of informed, risk-based, and practical due diligence on who you're dealing with. And secondly is ensuring that there's a clear communication of expectations, as well as the contractual framework is adequately drawn up to include what we call ABAC clauses, representations, warranties around this. And in case of long-term contracts, have this on an annual self-certification, so on and so forth, that gets done. But I think the most important part is being mindful of the risk. If you do know that there is a third party who does have, as part of their scope, representation before the government, before a regulator, before a regulatory body, is to communicate, ensure, and follow the same processes you would follow while, for example, engaging legal counsel. You would check the arguments, you would check the pleadings, you would check the affidavits, and then that's what goes to court. And I think the same process needs to come in here. And the alarm bells have to be need not to be sophisticated alarm bells. First and foremost, how much work are they doing? Secondly, is something happening out of the ordinary, out of turn? There's no application going, but somehow the status on the website says return filed. And more importantly, what are the out-of-pocket expenses, and can you get a proper description of what the expenses are? And thereafter, at the business level, to take the courage to say, we don't want to do this. And if it's going to take more time, it's going to take more visits, it's going to take more correspondence, it's going to take appeals, so on and so forth, complaints, etc., we're going to stand by and do so, as opposed to having all the framework, telling the person not to do so, but not giving them the tools and not be willing to say that this may be a more expensive process in terms of time and effort that gets taken, but need not necessarily to be able to do the right thing. So I think that would be the short answer.
Terrific, Sherbir. Thank you. And the last question, which is somewhat similar to the one that Sherbir has answered, but I think Denise can take this from an in-house GC perspective. We are planning to draft and implement an internal ABAC policy at our organization. What provisions can we incorporate to encourage or facilitate the reporting of violations of bribery and corruption norms?
So when we start off with the drafting, first and foremost, please, the one thing that needs to be looked at is the structure of the organization and identify the points where there can be a possibility of bribery or a corruption matter. Now, in this manner, when you map your organization, you will first know that where your pain points are, where you are sensitive, and where that can happen. So that is one. Then get trainings done. So trainings is basically, it has to be exhaustive, where you tell them to the extent that what is okay, what is not okay. And even if you have a 0.001% doubt, who are the people you need to have a conversation with, understand what you can do, and then go ahead and have a conversation. Also tell them about, so the policy should also cover your matrix, how you are planning to, like, let's say if there is a instance where you are not sure what to do, who do you contact? Who are your POCs? At the same time, if your POC is there, person is defined, but it is also related or linked to a certain other department, then you make that thing also, because many a times when you are basically, the problem comes in where the person is not aware, or they give some information in good faith, not even realizing that there are repercussions that may happen somewhere else because of the information, because that may be a part information, that may not be a clear picture. So sensitizing the people as to how much, where, and if you're not aware, do not say, but direct it to a certain individual at your company. So if you have hubs, if you have plants, you need to identify one person in your organization that if there is somebody who is coming in from regulator, government, or third party who is asking questions, instead of answering them, which you may not be aware of, or you may have part information and not the whole picture, you will have that designated person. You either direct it to that person or immediately call the legal or your compliance team that, oh, somebody like this has come, what do I do? So that will actually help you structure. So those are the components that you need to put in your scope, I would say SOP. Along with that, your policy should have all these details, but your mapping is something which I would say has to be done in a very thorough manner, because that is where you will get to know that which are the people you need to concentrate and train, and also that you need to closely monitor.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Denise. And thank you all, Vinayak, Denise, and Sherbir, for taking time out for this session. I can tell you that anybody watching this video this is pure gold. Really, I think everything that you've all shared, if somebody is to sit and go through it and make notes, this is something that can be part of any law school or any compliance program that's giving insight to students to make them better compliance professionals, or even those who are today heads of legal, heads of compliance, GCs. All of which that we have covered today is absolute gold. So thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedules, for making time for this session, and really appreciate the time that you've spent and the insights you've shared. Again, I just want to reiterate, at the sake of sounding repetitive, this is pure gold. So thank you all for today's session.
Thanks so much, Anthony, for having us here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise, Vinayak, Sherbir. Thanks again.
Thank you.